Hi, welcome to day 27 of the Easter tree. Today we're going to study Esther. So we're actually going to read the whole book of Esther. King Cyrus, he is now in charge of the Persian Empire. This is the map of that time. It takes up a huge space, 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. It's in the green. It's a massive area. The Persian Empire has a lot of power. During this time, King Cyrus had freed the Israelites who were slave to the Babylonian Empire. He freed them and said that they can go back to Jerusalem. Well, a lot of the Israelites who had assimilated into the Persian culture decided that it wasn't that important to them to go back to Jerusalem. They chose to stay. Here is a picture of Susa. This is where the city of Susa, today where Esther takes place, and the long journey to come out of exile. It is a long journey, so you can infer from it that those who decided to stay, they were not as devoted to the Lord as those who wanted to go back and worship at the original temple in Jerusalem. The name Esther is a Persian name, and it means star. Esther's Hebrew name is Hadassah, which means myrtle or fragrance. The king we meet here, his name is King Ahasuerus, but in the Greek he's called King Xerxes. So when I refer to the king, I'll say Xerxes because it's easier to pronounce his name than Ahasuerus. You'll probably say, God bless you. We meet Esther, and she is an orphan girl. She's brought up by her cousin, who is an uncle, Mordecai. We can assume that she's beautiful. If you keep in mind what we learned yesterday, you'll remember that when the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar took captive the Jews, they were of the upper class. They were the royalty and they were educated people. The transition from the Babylonian Empire falling to the Medo-Persian Empire rising was Cyrus the Great. He was born in interesting conditions. His mother was a Mede and his father was a Persian. So he's the perfect candidate to be the king of the Medo-Persian Empire. He issued the decree in Ezra 1, allowing the Israelites to come out of exile and return to Jerusalem. Most returned to Jerusalem and Judah, but there were those who stayed back. This was Esther's story. At this point in the story, for the king, the only area that he was not able to conquer was Greece. So this was a thorn in his side. He decided to throw these huge parties. This was an attempt to show off and draw this power. Here we meet the king throwing a 7-day public party and a 180-day expo. So this is the ultimate party. It almost seems like a movie scene where you see all the luxurious fabrics and the jewels and sort of a stage set for the wealth and the power that's displayed. Everybody's completely drunk and intoxicated, and the only rule was that there was no rule, no restraining. We know from history that Queen Vashti was a granddaughter of King Nebuchadnezzar. She was asked, in fact, she was not even asked, she was summoned by King Xerxes to come out wearing her crown. And commentaries have said that this means that she was supposed to appear only wearing a crown in order to display her beauty. Well, can you imagine if you're the queen, especially if you were raised in the household of Nebuchadnezzar, you have your dignity and you have your pride. She refuses him. Obviously, you can see that she doesn't respect him as a man or a king. And you can think about also the ways in which she was probably brought into being a queen. It wasn't out of love. It wasn't an arrangement. It was because her grandfather's kingdom had been taken over. What's interesting here is that the king, who is trying to display his incredible power and his authority and show off his wealth, cannot make a decision for himself. He's consulting people to figure out what he's going to do about controlling his wife. So then his councilman Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the people who are in all the provinces. For the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt. So then they decide to actually make it a law where you had to listen to your husband. Well, the irony is that if you make it a law and you mandate women having to show respect to their husbands, you in fact sabotage true respect. Is it true honor when it's forced? I think about some of those marriages where there were actually husband and wife honoring one another, and this law just tainted it. You can't decree honor. And there continues to be versions of that, especially in the Near East. So after his anger subsided, he missed her. So then in walks his poor counsel. It's just a bad idea continuing to go bad. We see the great lengths that he's going for his own sensual pleasure, and his counsel is not giving him any wise wisdom. Another adoption. We hear the decree, and now we meet Esther. For those of you out there who think, oh, look, Princess Esther gets to be part of a harem, it really was not a good thing. Can you imagine for those girls who are beautiful, who were maybe already betrothed to be married, dreams dashed, a hope to have a husband and children, hopes dashed? Remember that the king is not someone who really values women. This is who you're going to have to serve, hopes dashed. You're not necessarily treated as a human being in this scenario, because look at the way he just discarded of a queen. He killed her in hot anger. These young girls had to leave their family and their home, and they were just taken, carted in like cattle into the palace. Yes, they were given beauty treatments, but they were not given any dignity or respect. It was not a position of honor, so let's not try to romanticize it. Esther has a personality. Her demeanor and her countenance must have been something that was refreshing to him. And of course, that's not a coincidence. God made her that way for his purpose. Mordecai works at the king's gate as a sort of palace police. We saw this with Daniel and we saw this with Joseph, where God's people, when they were in exile, were put in prestigious positions, asked to serve in the kingdom where they were. There are reports that document that about 500 boys were taken captive from Babylonia and Assyria, and they were castrated and made to serve in the Persian palace. So it wasn't just the women basically at the king's disposal. So Esther wasn't just Jewish, but she was a Jewish orphan. So she has two strikes against her in this scenario. So Mordecai is protecting Esther and telling her not to disclose her identity, because not only is she Jewish, but she's also a Jewish orphan. It's worth further pondering the fact that Mordecai and Esther can assimilate into the culture without anything standing out that they are Jewish. If they did adhere to the Mosaic law, it would have been obvious by what they wore, by what they ate, by how they spoke. Through their behavior and their customs, they would have stood out as Jews. Many of the Jews had all but forgotten God in their daily disciplines, but the point is, God had not forgotten them. They may have forgotten their identity, but God did not forget their identity. This is a good warning for us too, because we too could be steeped in our own culture where we are unaware of the fact that we are not flavorful and salty in the world carrying the gospel, that sometimes we're undistinguishable. So let's not forget who we are and forget our identity in Christ. She's going to trust Haggai's counsel. He knows what the king's like. She's going to trust him and his advice. Wise. It worked. So she was an obedient girl, and she trusted the counsel that she was given. Mordecai's doing his job, and he gets a tip that someone's trying to kill the king. An assassination attempt was foiled thanks to Mordecai. So what is this tension between Mordecai and Haman? Well, it goes back a long time. Mordecai is a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin who is a descendant of King Saul. Haman is an Amalekite who is a descendant of King Agag. Well, we need to go back to 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 10 through 23, and also verse 30, in order to understand what's going on here. So here the Lord has commanded Saul to go fight the Amalekites and to destroy them and destroy all of their things. Saul did not obey, and he spared King Agag, which then later on through time, Haman is a descendant of this king because of Saul's not obeying what God had said. Samuel saying to obey is better than sacrifice. You just need to do what God has asked you to do. At this point, Saul is short-sighted. He doesn't understand what God's plan is, and so you fast forward, and now we have Esther and God's people essentially at the hands of Agag's revenge by his descendant. Look in Judges chapter 6 verse 3 and also 1 Samuel chapter 30 verse 1 through 4, Deuteronomy chapter 25 verse 17 through 19. And there you'll see why God was very displeased with the Amalekites and why he felt that they were incredibly evil. They had done such injustice to children and the elderly that God was not going to tolerate them. Basically, God doesn't like it if you mess around with his children. So after knowing that history, you understand now there's a tension between Mordecai and Haman. It's not just about these two men, but a people group they represent. On the one hand, Haman represents those who hate God and God's people, and Mordecai represents God's people. And we see that Haman sought to destroy all the Jews. So here is Haman now plotting, trying to make laws and political gain in order to destroy God's people. Destroy because they're different. But it's not because they're different. It's because he hates God. It's because he doesn't like that they are God's people. And he even tries to make it seem like it's profitable to the king to kill a whole people group. And of course, this silly, foolish king, this unwise king, says, okay, and gives him his signet ring. A signet ring is basically a credit card. It's like saying, here's my power, and he just forfeits his power and his authority, and he just gives it to Haman. Hello? And he says, what's good to Haman is not good for the Israelites. Can you believe that? As if to destroy is not enough. But he's saying to destroy, to kill, to annihilate, and to plunder. Brothers and sisters, this is exactly what the devil wants to do to you. He doesn't just want to foil your plans. He just doesn't want to hurt you a little bit. He wants to kill, destroy, annihilate, and plunder you. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. I say, clothe yourself with the salvation that Jesus offers you and run to God. I love the Near East in the sense of their expression and their passion. And he's wailing. To put on sackcloth and ashes is to grieve and to make evident, not just on the inside, but on the outside, being obviously evident of their current state. We see the word annihilate here. In Hebrew is abad, A-B-A-D. We see that in Revelation chapter 9, verse 11. John chapter 10, verse 10 describes Satan as a thief as well, who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Our enemy seeks to kill and destroy us and everything that matters to us. Satan's agenda is to hurt God. Since he can't hurt God directly, he knows the way to hurt God is to hurt God's children. The beautifully frustrating thing about this is that Satan can't ultimately have his way. He can't have what he wants. He cannot destroy any of us who belongs to Jesus Christ. The death sentence has been put down. In the palace, Esther is a little clueless to this. She's in a bit of a denial. And so she goes and sends out clothing to cover her uncle. So Mordecai uses a go-between person to communicate with Esther. How frustrating. They're so close in distance, but they're so far away in the societal hierarchy that they can't have access to one another, even though they're relatives. Esther has been queen, but it's still been 30 days since she saw her husband, the king. And so she's saying, I can't just show up. I can't just go in and say, hey, honey, let's talk. She has to be summoned. And she's saying, I may not even have favor with him anymore. He's occupied or busy or doing something else. I can't dare to go. I need him to call me. Even after he calls me, he needs to extend a golden scepter to me to show that I'm allowed to be there. In that time, literally, in the king's throne room, outside the door, there were guards that were there and would literally kill anyone who would try to enter to see the king without having been summoned. So he's saying, stop being in denial, stop being delusional. God's sovereign hand is upon the situation. God may have put you in this position for this reason. Just because you're living in the palace, don't think that he's going to overlook that you're a Jew. And we know this to be true because look at what happened to Queen Vashti. So then Esther's reply is, then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. It's no small request that Esther is asking everybody to fast and pray, especially because this is a time when they're all getting ready for Passover, which is a time of feasting. Because this whole story, you see feast, feast, feast. And here, in stark contrast, Esther is saying, stop and let's pray and let's fast. Let's not eat, the opposite, for the sake of the Lord. So here she goes. She's boldly covered in prayer, and she's going with boldness, equipped with her little mustard seed of faith with God. I love that because that's also a picture of God extending himself to us. And if you can imagine Jesus as a scepter, it's because of Jesus that was extended to us and we connecting through Christ that we are able to come and approach the King. We're able to enter into his court. I wonder, was she afraid Or was this all part of her plan to just pique curiosity and just to honor and work Haman? Because at this point, Haman has no idea that she's a Jew and is all about ego. He is the ultimate narcissist. So he thinks it's all about him, and he's just probably loving the fact that he was asked by the queen and the king. He's included in this little inner circle. He's part of the cool kids club, and he got invited. So I'm sure this fed his ego tremendously. But I think it can be assumed too that Esther was scared. If you're scared because God is asking you to do something, that's okay. Even Queen Esther struggled with it. So pray about it, fast, and take heart. But even as this is going on, Haman is conspiring. He is conspiring, making big plans to kill Mordecai. And we see that when he plans to hang Mordecai. So, of course, Haman is delighted, and he's just bragging to his friends and bragging to his wife that he got to be included and invited into this exclusive dinner. So, isn't he special? So, he's hung up on this one person that wouldn't bow down to him. 50 cubits is about 75 feet high. It's a 7-story building. This is how high he's making these gallows to hang Haman. He's going to make it a spectacle. Isn't it God's sovereignty where this is the part that he ends up reading? God gives him insomnia, and God plans it, bookmarks it, for this part of the chronicle to be read. I mean, you saved the king's life, and nothing was done for you. Talk about overlooked. In fact, Haman was rewarded a position of prestige, wasn't he? Of course, then, the king can't decide on what to do on his own. So he decides to consult Haman, who's in the court building this gallows. And I wonder, could he not sleep because Haman's people were bang, 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 banging to make a 7-story gallows? Maybe that's what was causing the insomnia. But this is such a funny part, though. Basically, Haman is saying, I want your job, king. I want to be king. This is read like comedy. He's having to say that all through the city. So funny. The Jewish people are known for having God's favor. His wife is saying, you can't really go toe-to-toe with God. Oh, big no-no. So here the king returns from having gone outside for a quick walk and comes back in, and he sees Haman on the couch next to Esther, and he says, will he even assault the queen in my presence in my own house? And as the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. So that was it for Haman, and we see that he was hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king was abated. But the problem isn't completely solved, is it? Because still there's a death sentence. The decree has already gone out on quick horses, all that territory on the map, that on the day of Passover they are to be killed. So now Esther needs to reverse this. But the problem is, he could not reverse the law after it was written. So instead, they decided to write another counter law that basically nullifies it. The Jews had gained a tremendous victory. So there was gladness, and there was joy, and there was feast, and there was a holiday. There were also converts, because when God's power is displayed to his people, you can't help but believe. It was a miracle. So now Purim is observed. Yay! It was Esther who then completes what King Saul could not complete in 1 Samuel. Some helpful tools. I love this Esther storybook. The illustrations help me see just the Persian influence, and I love that Esther is Jewish looking as well. Another great Bible study is Esther by Beth Moore. I love that study. Beth, if you're listening, hi. Day 27, Esther. So let's open up our ornament. What is inside? My attempt to making a mini scepter. I put some bling on there. One side says Esther because it's star, and the other side is Hadassah, and that's the Jewish form of Hadassah. I put these little handcuffs there because the Jews in slavery and how God delivered them. God's rescue. Now, the challenge, always, how to apply it in your life. Whatever that looks like for you, go for it. Take some time to let it soak in. Listen to some music. Set aside some time where it was just you and God, and maybe you could rededicate yourself to the Lord as well. Just claim back your faith. It's not time to judge yourself. It's just time to just lay it out to God. He knows. He knows. So just go. He loves you. He loves you. He loves you. He loves you. I hope you see this merciful, loving God. He's not mad at you. Just come to him. He already knows. He knows your story better than you do. You know me by now. There's some sort of art piece. So here I have Esther. Dun, dun, dun. Here's the beautiful picture of Mordecai and Haman. See, Haman does not look happy. I put a picture here to show that Mordecai is a descendant of Saul and Haman a descendant of Agag. And these are the verses here. Here's the signet ring, and here is the cord, sort of the noose that implies the gallows. Did you see the stars here for Esther and Hadassah? I attempted the scepter and sort of having a Persian-looking Jesus there. I hope you like my Persian-looking Jesus and the cross, because that is only the way we can approach the throne room of the King. God extending his scepter, Christ, to us. And here she says, if I perish, I perish, and she is about to reach out. And here, I love this dramatic part where Esther's going, it's Haman! And he's going, coughing up his wine. Well, thank you again for joining me, and I pray that this will be such a rich time for you to get reconnected with God and fall in love with him all over again.